right now is such a tough time for so many people, just trying to wrap your mind around, okay, what's happening the next day? How do you see this playing out for people right now and their emotional states?
Depends on where you were to start with. If
Mm,
you are already a very anxious person, which can help sometimes because then you take the proper precautions, thinking about reopening, thinking about starting our lives supposedly back out with sometimes people who aren't terribly responsible, it
mhm,
makes you even more unnerved. For
mm.
those people who are probably from a segment of the population that's not at great risk, they've had enough. They're ready to move on. They believe that if they get sick, they'll recover. So they want to get out. And so what happens is that we have dissension about how it is that we should proceed, and that's bad for anybody's mood.
You talk about emotional inflammation. What does that exactly mean?
I thought you might ask that. Yes, Emotional Inflammation is the title of my book that
Great.
I wrote with my great co-author, Stacy Colino. And it's, if you think about it, it's what you would expect. Emotional inflammation, physical inflammation. We know what physical inflammation is.
Right.
Emotional inflammation is like that, in that our emotions are stirred up, they're swollen up, they hurt. They keep us from doing the things that we want to do as well as we did before. And it's all about that being kind of our default mode right now.
Mm.
Long before COVID, people were already agitated. We've got political dysfunction, we've got racial issues, income inequality, climate change as the backdrop. People have a great sense of unease at the moment, and we got to fix that.
Well, being here in DC, even, I mean, we do have COVID-19, but then, as you mentioned, the past week has been very tough with racial injustice. And then also, we have a political election coming up. How does this play when you hear all of that constantly and it can be overwhelming to people? Can they get overloaded?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
And my co-author Stacy often does something different from what I do.
mm.
She very much limits her exposure to media. No offense to media.
None taken.
I'm more of a FOMO type. I want to know what's happening because
Uh,
otherwise I don't feel as safe if I don't know what's happening. So what's really important and what we discuss in the book is that there's a menu of options that you can take. And it really depends on the fact that people have different temperament styles. We have different ways of coping, and what works for one doesn't work for another. But there's a whole list of many things that we can do, right down to having a little bit of a victory garden, and even
mm.
on a rooftop. There's a community in Southeast that has a rooftop garden now. I don't know what they're doing at the very moment, but it fostered a sense of community. People who didn't know each other, talk to each other before, were now eating together. There's so many things that we can do to restore our moods. We just got to realize that this is what's imperative now as we reopen and rebuild.
I think the mind is so important too. And I know you talk a lot about this. I feel like your mind can take something, the facts and information, and then turn it into something else. How do you gain control over what your mind can do?
It's a very, very important issue.
Mm,
And the more we understand our own emotions and what's driving them, the triggers that drive us to feel like we want to tear our hair out, the better we are at being able to control those emotions or how we express them. Doesn't mean that we don't have them, because those emotions are really important. They're really our guideposts. They tell us where we are and what we need and what we want. But how we express them then has to be filtered through a set of behaviors that's not only going to work for us, but that's going to work for the people that we live with, that we're around, that we work with, and for the larger community. So lots of ways to look and realize the fact that our emotions and our behaviors are different. There's a
mm,
substantial irrational part of our being. So even if it doesn't make sense, let it, understand it,
mm.
go back, figure out what it's coming from, and then say to yourself, okay, what can I do to take the temperature down on this issue? What can I do to clarify the issue? You don't want to win, you want to clarify.
Interesting. What do you mean by you don't want to, you don't need to master it?
Well, you don't want to win in the sense, suppose this strong emotion, that's an important point, isn't just within you, but it's playing out with the
Mm,
people that you are with. And so often what happens is you have conflicting styles. People don't understand each other. So what you really want to do, most of the dissension that I find in the world is that people just didn't understand each other very well.
Hmm.
And once you start to explain, oh, you meant that? Oh, I thought you were referring to, no, that's not what I was saying. Most often I find that people just didn't understand each other or didn't realize they had a different coping style. So what you want to do is say, you don't want to win in an interpersonal issue. What you want to do is clarify, walk away. Maybe you agree to disagree, but at least you understand what the other person means and where he or she is coming from.
That does make sense, especially somebody, as you mentioned, who doesn't cope with things the same way you do, to at least understand what they're going through.
Exactly.
I know you have this beautiful landscape behind you right now, and you also talk about connecting with nature. You mentioned the garden before. Why is it so important that we connect with nature right now?
Well, first, let me tell the viewers that you're seeing a very beautiful background. We won't talk about the foreground. But there you have it.
Secret with
And
me.
connecting with nature is our home. That's where we were brought up from an evolutionary perspective. That's how our bodies were designed. And when we live in tune with nature, and that means with all of the species in nature, being as respectful of them and their lives as our own, it has a massively healing effect on us.
Mm.
That has to do with light, our exposure to light, our exposure to green. You said it's a beautiful background.
It is.
I chose it specifically when people see green and they see patterns. This really lifts our spirits. And then there's the whole field of psychoacoustics, which is all about the sounds of nature. We tend to close ourselves off with air conditioning and can only hear human sounds, human made sounds. But nature calms down our fight or flight mechanism. So the sounds of crickets and the sounds of frogs and toads and the sounds, especially of water, are extraordinarily calming. So this is why we're now seeing people crave and they talk
Yes.
about it. I want to be out in nature.
Uh-huh. Oh,
This is what we were designed. This is where we were designed to be.
my afternoon walk with our dog has become the most important part of my day to separate,
There you
especially
go.
work from being at home.
There you go. Exactly.
You also mentioned something about being an agent of change. What do you mean by that, and how do we become an agent of change?
Well, that's actually, I love all the chapters. As Stacy says, don't say this, but I really think Agent of Change is the most important chapter. They're all important. But Agent of Change means that when we see the things around us that aren't right, when we recognize that there's social injustice, and when we feel powerless, if we say to ourselves, what can I do to change things around me, around the people around me, and understanding that there are ripple effects. Whatever we do to change things has influence on our neighbors, our friends, and collectively, people will say, oh, what one person does doesn't matter. Well, it sure as heck does. That's why we vote in November. Our votes, our actions are counted together. And when we become agents of change, when we take the initiative, maybe it's phone banking. If the election's certainly coming up, if you got candidates you feel are going to promote the values that you embrace, get out there, or not out there, whatever, where we'll be, I don't know.
Social media.
But make sure that you take that action. If you believe that we have to be more respectful of nature, plant yourself either a little victory garden, if that's the case, or even herbs along your windowsill. There are just tons of ways that we can, whether it's racial injustice, talking to people about what injustice means to you, and allowing them, giving them a chance to speak about what elements are bothering them. This is a way to change the culture. And just as there are tipping points, as I say, in climate, which is where I've been for so many years, there are tipping points in the culture when enough people are talking about these issues in the right way. It sensitizes us, and we are agents of change, and it brings down our anxiety.
I know your book has been in the work for more than just the past 2 months, a lot longer, but what timely manner for it to come out. We need this right now. So thank you so much for your message.
Thank you, Ellen. Pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, great meeting you.